Mercy is the bravest choice in a world that worships power. Rain poured over the winding forest road, turning the dirt into thick mud that clung to every step Emily Carter took as she hurried home with a small basket of herbs pressed against her chest. At 22, she had learned that walking with her head down invited fewer cruel remarks from the members of Silver Hollow Pack. They called her a weak omega, a burden, a girl born without the strength that every wolf admired. Even so, she still stopped whenever someone was hurting, because kindness was the only thing no one had managed to take from her. As thunder rolled across the mountains, frightened voices echoed ahead. Curious, Emily stepped closer until the trees opened into a narrow clearing beside the old stone bridge. Nearly a dozen wolves surrounded something so small she almost missed it. Their laughter drifted through the rain while a trembling white wolf pup, no larger than a household puppy, struggled to pull itself away from the circle. Its snow-colored fur was soaked, one tiny paw trapped beneath a fallen branch. "It's just a stray," one man scoffed. "Leave it to the storm." Another shrugged. "Or chase it deeper into the woods. We don't need rogues wandering near our pack." The frightened pup let out a weak cry that barely rose above the rain. Yet something inside Emily tightened. The sound carried more fear than anger, more loneliness than danger. Without thinking, she stepped between the crowd and the trembling little animal. "Please," she said quietly. "It's only a baby." Several wolves stared at her before bursting into amused laughter. "Of course the broken omega wants to save a stray," one woman muttered. "She always chooses the hopeless things." Emily ignored every word. She slowly knelt in the wet grass, careful not to frighten the pup. Its bright blue eyes met hers for a single heartbeat, and instead of growling, it crawled toward her with surprising trust. Her hands gently lifted the heavy branch, and the tiny wolf stumbled into her arms, shivering so hard she could feel every tiny heartbeat against her coat. For one strange moment, the storm seemed quieter. The frightened pup buried its nose beneath her chin as if it had known her forever. Emily wrapped it inside her worn cloak and stood again, shielding it from the cold rain. Behind her, the crowd exchanged puzzled glances, but no one noticed the faint silver marking hidden beneath the pup's damp fur, glowing for only an instant before disappearing beneath the falling rain. Emily hurried along the narrow trail until the voices behind her faded beneath the steady rhythm of falling rain. The tiny wolf pup remained tucked safely inside her cloak, its small body still trembling against her heartbeat, but with every passing minute the shivers became weaker. She glanced down and managed a gentle smile. "You are safe now," she whispered, more to comfort herself than the frightened little creature. The path eventually climbed toward the edge of Silver Hollow, where the crowded homes of the pack slowly disappeared behind towering pines. Emily lived farther than anyone else, in a modest wooden cottage her late grandmother had once called the quietest place in the valley. Most wolves considered it too isolated, but Emily had always preferred birdsong to whispers of judgment. As she pushed open the weathered front door, the familiar scent of cedar wood and dried lavender greeted her. She quickly placed the basket of herbs onto the kitchen table before kneeling beside the stone fireplace. After several careful strikes, warm flames flickered to life, casting a soft golden glow across the room. The little wolf blinked uncertainly as the warmth reached its damp fur. Emily gently wrapped it inside a clean wool blanket and carefully examined its injured paw. The swelling was noticeable, but thankfully no bones appeared broken. "Someone has had a difficult day," she murmured. She crushed fresh camphor leaves together with a few drops of pine resin, creating the soothing mixture her grandmother had taught her to make years before. Every movement was slow, patient, and reassuring. The tiny wolf watched her with remarkable focus, never once pulling away as she spread the herbal salve across its paw. Most frightened animals resisted strangers, yet this one simply rested its head against her wrist as though it trusted her completely. Emily found herself laughing softly. "Well, you certainly have good manners." After bandaging the paw with clean linen, she warmed a small bowl of goat's milk near the fire. The pup hesitated only for a second before eagerly drinking every last drop. Watching its appetite return eased the worry that had settled inside her since the clearing. Outside, the rain continued to drum against the roof while distant thunder echoed through the mountains. Emily locked the front door, not because she feared wild animals, but because she knew curious pack members rarely respected her privacy. She carried the little wolf to an old rocking chair beside the fireplace and covered both of them with a faded quilt stitched by her grandmother many winters ago. Before long, the pup curled into a perfect circle across her lap, releasing a tiny sigh that sounded almost relieved. Emily gently brushed her fingers through its impossibly soft white fur when something unexpected caught her eye. Beneath the damp strands just below its shoulder, a delicate silver crest shimmered for the briefest instant before fading again like moonlight disappearing behind clouds. She blinked, wondering if exhaustion had played tricks on her eyes. Ancient stories spoke of royal blood carrying unusual markings blessed by the moon goddess herself, but those were only legends shared to entertain children during winter nights. Smiling at her own imagination, Emily simply tucked the blanket a little tighter around the sleeping pup. Far beyond Silver Hollow, hidden within a fortress carved into the northern cliffs, dozens of armored royal guards stood silently around a massive map spread across an oak table. Every face carried the same quiet concern. At the head of the room stood Alpha King Cale Ashford, his silver eyes fixed upon a single empty chair beside the throne. Without turning, he spoke in a calm voice that somehow carried through the entire chamber. "Search every forest, every village, and every pack. Bring my son home." None of them noticed that the royal tracking crystal resting upon the table had just begun glowing faintly, pointing directly toward the forgotten cottage where the future heir slept peacefully beside the woman who had no idea that destiny had already crossed her doorstep. Morning sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, painting soft patterns across the wooden floor as Emily awoke to an unusual silence. For a brief moment she wondered whether the events of the previous evening had been nothing more than an exhausted dream. Then she felt a gentle weight resting against her shoulder. The tiny white wolf pup had climbed onto the bed sometime before dawn and now slept peacefully beside her, its breathing slow and steady. Emily smiled before carefully slipping out from beneath the blanket so she would not disturb it. She prepared a simple breakfast of fresh bread, warm goat's milk, and honey while humming the same quiet melody her grandmother had loved. The little wolf stirred the moment it caught the scent of warm milk. It stretched lazily, revealing that its injured paw already looked far better than it had only hours before. Emily blinked in surprise. Healing that quickly should not have been possible. "You really are remarkable," she whispered as she placed the small bowl onto the floor. Instead of rushing toward the food, the pup looked directly into her eyes, almost as though it understood every word. Only after Emily nodded encouragingly did it begin drinking. Throughout the morning the little companion followed her everywhere. When she watered the herb garden behind the cottage, it trotted beside her with tiny determined steps. When she gathered lavender and mint, it carefully avoided trampling even the smallest flowers. Once, as Emily reached for a basket hanging above the doorway, she accidentally dropped several bundles of dried herbs. Before she could kneel to collect them, the pup gently picked up one bundle after another and carried them to her feet. Emily laughed in disbelief. "You are smarter than most people I know." The tiny wolf responded with a cheerful bark that sounded almost proud. Hours passed peacefully until a pair of sparrows suddenly burst from the nearby trees, scattering into the bright blue sky. The little wolf instantly lifted its head. Its ears twitched toward the distant forest and the playful curiosity disappeared from its eyes. It stood perfectly still, listening to something Emily could not hear. Then, without warning, it hurried toward the edge of the clearing. Emily quickly followed. "Wait." The pup stopped only after reaching an old stone fence covered with climbing ivy. It looked deep into the forest before returning to Emily's side and gently pressing against her leg, as if reassuring itself that she was still there. Emily knelt and stroked its soft fur. "Whatever frightened you is gone now," she said quietly. Hidden far beyond the trees, several riders dressed in dark traveling cloaks guided their horses through the mountain trails. They avoided villages and pack roads, speaking only when necessary. One rider dismounted beside a narrow stream and examined the muddy ground. Fresh paw prints crossed the trail, accompanied by the faint footprints of a young woman wearing worn leather boots. He immediately signaled the others. "The trail is recent," he said. "Less than 24 hours." The captain silently removed a small crystal pendant from beneath his cloak. The stone glowed brighter than it had at sunrise. He looked toward the distant valley where thin smoke curled from a lonely chimney hidden among the pines. "Inform His Majesty," he said with quiet certainty. The prince is alive. Back at the cottage, Emily knew nothing of the search quietly drawing closer with every passing hour. She simply carried a basket into the garden, while the little wolf happily bounded through the grass, chasing butterflies instead of running away. Watching the tiny creature discover simple joys filled the empty corners of her heart with a warmth she had not felt since losing her grandmother. She did not notice that each time the pup looked at her, the faint silver crest beneath its white fur shimmered just a little longer than before, as though some ancient bond had already begun to awaken. The following morning arrived beneath clear blue skies, yet an unusual feeling lingered in the air as though the forest itself were waiting for something. Emily finished watering the last row of herbs before hanging fresh lavender beneath the porch roof to dry in the warm summer breeze. The tiny white wolf never wandered far from her side. Whenever she moved from one task to another, it followed with quiet determination, occasionally brushing against her leg as if making certain she had not disappeared. The simple affection warmed Emily's heart more than she cared to admit. She had spent years feeling invisible among her own pack, but somehow this small creature made the lonely cottage feel like a home again. After lunch she carried a basket into the woods to gather elderberries and medicinal mushrooms before autumn arrived. The pup eagerly trotted ahead, stopping every few yards to glance back and make sure she was still following. "You are becoming quite the guide," Emily teased with a gentle smile. The little wolf wagged its tail before leading her deeper beneath the towering pines where beams of sunlight filtered through emerald branches. Everything felt peaceful until they reached a narrow stream flowing over smooth gray stones. The pup suddenly froze. Its playful expression vanished. Its bright blue eyes fixed on the opposite bank where fresh footprints marked the damp soil. Emily noticed them as well. They belonged to several riders, their heavy boots leaving deep impressions that had not been there the day before. She quietly knelt beside the tracks. "Travelers," she murmured. "Strange. Hardly anyone comes this far into the forest." The little wolf gently nudged her hand, encouraging her to step away from the stream. Emily frowned. It almost seemed as though the pup recognized the scent carried by the breeze. Before she could think further, a majestic golden hawk circled overhead, letting out a sharp cry before disappearing beyond the trees. The tiny wolf watched the bird with remarkable intensity, then relaxed only after it had vanished from sight. Emily brushed aside her uneasiness and filled her basket, unaware that she had just stood within yards of the very search party looking for the little companion beside her. Hidden behind a rocky ridge less than half a mile away, Captain Rowan Hayes lowered the brass spyglass from his eyes. "Someone has been living in that cottage," he quietly observed. "Another royal." Guard nodded while studying the glowing crystal mounted inside an engraved silver compass. The light pulsed steadily toward the isolated home. "The prince is there," one whispered. Captain Hayes remained thoughtful. "His Majesty ordered us to protect the prince above everything else. If the child has chosen to remain with this woman willingly, then we approach with caution. No unnecessary fear. No mistakes." Hundreds of miles of searching had taught them that every decision mattered. Meanwhile, inside the royal fortress, Alpha King Cale Ashford stood alone on the highest balcony overlooking endless mountain forests. His expression remained calm, but every servant who passed could sense the quiet weight he carried. On the stone railing rested a small carved wooden wolf, worn smooth from years of careful handling. It had been his son's favorite toy. Cale closed his hand around it before looking toward the northern horizon. For the first time in days, a faint breeze carried a familiar scent. Hope. It was only the briefest instinct, impossible to explain, yet it eased the burden that had followed him since the prince disappeared. Far below, Emily and the tiny wolf returned home just before sunset. As she opened the cottage door, the little wolf suddenly paused and looked back toward the distant forest. Its silver crest flashed beneath its white fur more brightly than ever before. This time the mysterious glow lingered for several heartbeats before quietly fading, while somewhere beyond the trees, unseen eyes had already found the place where destiny was waiting. The first light of dawn had barely touched the mountain peaks when Captain Rowan Hayes stepped quietly from the shelter of the pines. Behind him, 6 royal guards waited with disciplined patience, their dark cloaks blending into the forest. No one reached for a weapon. No one spoke above a whisper. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on the small cottage nestled among the wildflowers below. The silver crystal inside the captain's compass now glowed with unwavering certainty. "There is no doubt," he said softly. "The prince is here." One of the younger guards shifted uneasily. "Should we recover His Highness?" "Immediately." Rowan slowly shook his head. "Not until His Majesty arrives. The prince has survived because someone protected him. We will not repay that kindness with fear." Nearly 50 miles away, Alpha King Cale Ashford rode through the northern valley with only 2 trusted companions at his side. Unlike the stories whispered across countless packs, he wore no jeweled crown and traveled without an army. His dark riding coat moved gently with the morning wind while his silver eyes never left the distant mountain trails stretching ahead. Every hour without his son had felt like an eternity, yet the message delivered before sunrise had changed everything. The prince had been found alive. For the first time in days, hope outweighed uncertainty. Back at the cottage, Emily remained completely unaware that history was quietly approaching her front door. She hummed softly while kneading bread dough on the wooden kitchen table. The tiny white wolf sat nearby, watching every movement with endless curiosity. When a small piece of flour landed on its nose, Emily laughed so warmly that the little wolf tilted its head in confusion before happily wagging its tail. "You certainly know how to brighten a quiet morning," she said. After breakfast, she carried a basket toward the nearby well. The little wolf bounded ahead before suddenly stopping beside the narrow path. Its ears lifted. Its bright blue eyes focused on the forest beyond the clearing. Emily noticed the change immediately. "What is it?" she asked. The pup remained perfectly still for several seconds before slowly relaxing. It looked back at Emily and gently nudged her hand as though encouraging her to continue walking. Hidden among the trees, Captain Rowan lowered his gaze. Even from that distance he had witnessed the remarkable trust between them. "He has bonded with her," one guard whispered in amazement. Rowan nodded thoughtfully. "I have served the royal family for 20 years. I have never seen the prince place such faith in anyone outside the palace." Before anyone could answer, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the valley. Every royal guard immediately straightened. Moments later, 3 riders emerged between the towering pines. The one in front carried himself with calm confidence that required no introduction. Alpha King Cale Ashford quietly brought his black stallion to a stop beside the hidden patrol. Rowan bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty." Cale accepted the greeting with a slight nod before looking toward the distant cottage. His expression remained composed, but the moment his eyes found the tiny white wolf playing beside Emily, something changed. The burden he had carried since his son's disappearance finally eased. The prince was alive. Safe. Laughing. Cale watched in complete silence as Emily carefully adjusted the little wolf's loose bandage before brushing a strand of hair away from its eyes with gentle affection. She expected nothing in return. She showed no sign of recognizing the royal crest hidden beneath the white fur. She simply cared because the small creature needed someone. The Alpha King remained still for several moments before quietly speaking. "No one enters that clearing without my permission." The guards exchanged surprised glances. Cale never looked away from the woman smiling beside his son. Anyone willing to protect a helpless child without knowing who he is deserves respect before questions. At that exact moment, the little wolf suddenly lifted its head. Its bright blue eyes locked onto the distant treeline where Cale stood hidden among the shadows. Without hesitation, the pup sprang forward, racing toward the forest with joyful excitement while Emily hurried after it, completely unaware that every step carried her closer to the truth that would change her life forever. The tiny white wolf raced across the meadow with joyful energy, weaving through patches of wildflowers as though every instinct inside it had awakened at once. Emily laughed despite herself and hurried after the little creature, careful not to lose sight of it among the tall grass. "Slow down," she called with a warm smile. "Your paw is still healing." But the pup did not stop. It reached the edge of the forest where towering pines cast long shadows across the ground, then suddenly stood perfectly still. Emily finally caught up, slightly out of breath, and gently rested her hand on its back. Before she could speak again, footsteps echoed softly from beyond the trees. One by one, several men dressed in elegant dark cloaks emerged from the forest. Their posture was disciplined, their expressions calm, and the silver wolf crest embroidered upon their cloaks shimmered in the afternoon sunlight. Emily instinctively stepped in front of the little wolf, her heart beating faster. She did not recognize them, but something about their quiet confidence commanded respect rather than fear. None of the strangers moved closer. They simply waited. Then another figure appeared between the ancient pines. He was taller than everyone around him, with dark hair touched by the mountain breeze and silver eyes that reflected the light like polished steel. His presence filled the clearing without a single raised voice. Emily had never seen him before, yet every story whispered throughout the Northern Territories suddenly came rushing back into her memory. The Alpha King. Cale Ashford stopped several yards away. His expression remained composed, but his gaze never left the tiny white wolf standing beside Emily. Time itself seemed to slow. The little wolf looked from Emily to Cale, its bright blue eyes shining with unmistakable excitement. Then it bounded across the clearing without hesitation. Emily reached out instinctively. Wait! Before her fingertips could touch its fur, a soft silver light surrounded the tiny body. The glow became brighter, gentle rather than blinding, swirling through the quiet air like moonlight dancing across still water. Emily stared in silent disbelief. The little wolf slowly disappeared within the shimmering light, and where the small creature had stood only moments before, a young boy of about 6 years old now stood barefoot upon the grass. His snow-white hair rested against his shoulders, and his brilliant blue eyes carried the very same warmth she had come to know over the past several days. The loose blanket she had wrapped around the pup now rested across the child's shoulders like a small cloak. He smiled the instant he saw her. Emily. Hearing her name spoken in a child's gentle voice left her completely speechless. Before she could process what had happened, the boy turned and ran toward Cale with laughter that echoed across the clearing. The Alpha King knelt without hesitation, opening his arms as the child rushed into a warm embrace. For several long moments, neither father nor son spoke. The silence itself carried more emotion than words ever could. The royal guards quietly lowered their heads, relief visible on every face. Captain Rowan allowed himself the smallest smile after days of relentless searching. Finally, Cale looked toward Emily while keeping one protective arm around the boy. His silver eyes were calm, grateful, and entirely free of the cold arrogance she had expected from the ruler described in countless stories. The young prince gently held his father's hand before turning back toward Emily. Without releasing Cale, he smiled brightly and reached one small hand toward her. "Come," he said with complete innocence. "You are family too." Emily remained frozen where she stood, unable to understand how a lonely Omega who had simply chosen kindness had suddenly found herself standing before the most powerful Alpha King alive, and the child she had believed was only a helpless little wolf. Emily could not move. The words echoed through the quiet clearing long after the young prince had spoken them. Family. No one had ever used that word so freely when speaking to her. She looked at the smiling child standing between her and the Alpha King, searching his face for some sign that this had all been a misunderstanding. Instead, she found only the same bright blue eyes that had looked up at her from beneath a rain-soaked blanket only days before. The same gentle trust. The same quiet warmth. Prince Noah reached for her hand with complete confidence. "You found me when everyone else was gone," he said softly. "You stayed." Emily slowly knelt until they were at eye level. "I only wanted to help," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "You were frightened and alone." Noah smiled as though that simple answer explained everything. He slipped his small hand into hers exactly as he had rested his tiny paw against her wrist so many times inside. The cottage. Alpha King Cale watched the moment in silence. He had ruled over the Northern Territories for many years. He had negotiated treaties, settled disputes between powerful packs, and earned the respect of wolves who feared almost nothing. Yet nothing had prepared him for seeing his son trust another person so completely. Noah had always been cautious, especially after learning the responsibilities that came with being the royal heir. Yet with Emily there was no hesitation, only peace. Cale finally stepped forward, stopping several feet away so that she would not feel overwhelmed. "Miss Emily Carter," he said in a calm, steady voice. "You have my deepest gratitude." Emily quickly lowered her eyes. "Your Majesty, I did not know who he was." "That," Cale replied gently, is exactly why your kindness carries such value. Captain Rowan quietly approached with respectful distance. Your Majesty, the entire kingdom has been searching for Prince Noah since he wandered beyond the royal borders during the storm. Every nearby pack received notices, but no one reported finding him. Emily's expression filled with confusion. He never wandered far from me after I found him. He barely left my side. Noah nodded enthusiastically. Because she made me feel safe. Several royal guards exchanged thoughtful glances. One older guard smiled to himself. The prince has refused every escort since he learned to walk alone, he murmured quietly. Yet he followed her everywhere. Cale heard the comment and looked once more toward Emily. Tell me honestly, he asked. Did anyone from your pack help you care for him? Emily hesitated before answering. No, Your Majesty. Most people believed he was only a stray wolf. They thought I should leave him in the forest. A quiet stillness settled over the clearing. Cale did not speak immediately, but those standing closest to him noticed the thoughtful change in his expression. He looked toward Noah, whose small fingers still held tightly to Emily's hand, then back at the modest clothes she wore and the worn boots still stained with mud from the day she had carried his son home. Nothing about her suggested wealth or influence. Everything about her reflected quiet compassion. Noah suddenly looked up at his father with hopeful eyes. Can Emily come with us? He asked. Please. Emily immediately shook her head. Your Highness, you belong with your family. The little prince smiled with innocent certainty. That is why I asked. Before Emily could find an answer, distant voices echoed through the valley. Members of Silver Hollow Pack had noticed the royal horses near the forest and were hurrying toward the clearing, completely unaware that they were about to witness a moment that would forever change how they saw the quiet Omega they had spent years overlooking. The peaceful clearing filled with hurried footsteps as members of Silver Hollow Pack emerged from the trees one after another. Conversation stopped the instant they recognized the royal banners carried by the guards. Faces that had moments earlier been filled with curiosity quickly shifted to astonishment. Pack leader Victor Hale pushed his way to the front of the gathering, lowering his head respectfully before the Alpha King. Your Majesty, he said carefully, we were unaware you were visiting our territory. Hale acknowledged him with a calm nod, but his attention remained on Prince Noah, who still stood beside Emily with one small hand wrapped around hers. The sight left the gathered wolves whispering among themselves. Several recognized Emily immediately. She was the quiet Omega they rarely noticed, the woman many had dismissed as too gentle for a world ruled by strength. Now she stood beside the royal heir as though she had always belonged there. Victor cautiously looked toward Emily before speaking again. Has this woman caused any trouble, Your Majesty? Before Cale could answer, Noah stepped forward. His small voice carried surprising confidence across the silent clearing. Emily saved me. Every whisper vanished. The little prince looked around at the gathered wolves without fear. When I was cold, she kept me warm. When I was hungry, she shared her food. When my paw hurt, she made it better. She never asked who I was. Emily lowered her eyes, embarrassed by the attention, but Noah gently squeezed her hand. She is my hero. The simple words settled over the crowd with unexpected weight. Captain Rowan quietly stepped forward holding the silver tracking compass. His Royal Highness disappeared during the storm several days ago, he announced. This woman protected the future heir to the throne until he could be safely reunited with his father. Victor's face lost all color. Several pack members exchanged uneasy glances as memories returned. They remembered laughing when Emily had carried the tiny white wolf away. They remembered calling it a stray. They remembered telling her to leave it behind. Cale finally turned his attention toward the gathering. His voice remained steady, yet every word carried unmistakable authority. Strength is not measured by the ability to command others. It is revealed by the willingness to protect someone who cannot repay your kindness. No one dared interrupt. This woman expected no reward, Cale continued. She believed she was helping a helpless creature, and she gave freely what many stronger wolves refused to offer. His silver eyes moved across the silent faces before resting briefly on Victor Hale. Compassion is never weakness. The pack leader slowly lowered his head even further. Your Majesty, we have judged her unfairly. Emily immediately looked toward him with quiet surprise. She had never expected to hear those words spoken aloud. Cale nodded once. Then let today become a lesson remembered throughout your pack. Prince Noah smiled brightly before reaching into the pocket of the blanket still wrapped around his shoulders. From inside he carefully removed a tiny carved wooden flower Emily had made for him the previous evening from a fallen branch behind the cottage. He proudly held it up for everyone to see. Emily made this because she thought it would make me smile. The little carving passed quietly into Cale's hands. The Alpha King studied its simple craftsmanship before looking back at Emily. It was not expensive. It held no magical power. Yet it represented something impossible to purchase. Genuine care freely given. Cale carefully returned the wooden flower to Noah before taking one thoughtful step toward Emily. "Miss Emily Carter," he said with sincere respect. "The royal house does not forget those who protect its family. Neither will I." As the afternoon sun bathed the clearing in warm golden light, the wolves of Silver Hollow realized that the woman they had overlooked for years was now being honored before the entire pack by the ruler of every northern territory, and for the first time, they saw not a forgotten Omega, but a woman whose quiet kindness had changed the course of a kingdom. As the gathering slowly came to an end, the afternoon sunlight softened into the golden glow of early evening. The royal guards quietly prepared the horses for the journey home. Yet one small figure refused to move. Prince Noah stood beside Emily, still holding her hand as though letting go would somehow make the last few days disappear. Emily smiled gently and knelt before him. "You belong with your father," she said softly. Noah looked at her with the same trusting eyes that had first met hers beneath the storm. "Can I come back?" he asked. Emily brushed a strand of white hair away from his forehead and nodded. "You will always be welcome." The young prince's face brightened instantly. Cale watched the exchange in thoughtful silence. Over the years he had seen nobles seek favor, warriors seek glory, and ambitious leaders seek power. Yet Emily had sought none of those things. She had simply opened her home to a frightened child without expecting recognition. That kind of heart was rarer than any treasure his kingdom possessed. As Noah reluctantly climbed onto his father's horse, he leaned forward and wrapped both arms around Emily one last time. "Thank you for finding me," he whispered. Emily hugged him gently. "Thank you for reminding me that kindness always finds its way home." The little prince smiled before settling in front of Cale. The Alpha King looked down at Emily for a quiet moment. "Your cottage may be small," he said, "but my son found something within its walls that even a palace could not give him. Peace." Emily lowered her head respectfully. "I only treated him as I hoped someone would treat any lost child." Cale nodded with quiet admiration. "Then never change." He reached into his coat and removed a silver pendant engraved with the royal wolf crest. Unlike a medal of wealth or rank, its design was simple and elegant. "Carry this whenever you need the protection of the crown. Every royal guard throughout the northern territories will recognize it." Emily accepted the pendant with trembling hands, unable to find the right words. As the royal procession finally began moving toward the mountain road, Noah turned around repeatedly, waving until the cottage disappeared behind the trees. Emily remained standing in the meadow, the silver pendant resting against her heart, as the evening breeze carried the scent of pine through the valley. High above, the first full moon slowly appeared beyond the mountains, bathing the quiet clearing in pale silver light. For just an instant, a faint moon-shaped mark shimmered upon Emily's wrist before fading as gently as it had appeared. She looked down in quiet surprise, unaware that Cale had noticed the same mysterious light from the distant trail. His thoughtful gaze lingered for only a moment before he turned toward the horizon, saying nothing. Some answers, he understood, arrived only when destiny was ready to reveal them. Behind him rode the smiling prince whose life had been changed by one ordinary woman with an extraordinary heart, while back in the quiet valley, Emily returned to her little cottage carrying no dreams of greatness, only the comforting certainty that even the smallest act of compassion could echo farther than anyone could ever imagine.